The military escalation deepens suffering of displaced people nationwide. The United Nations announces reduction of food assistance to Yemen amid funding crisis. The United States Navy seizes weapons heading from Iran to Houthi rebels. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Rana Swaylam. The International Organization for Migration announced the displacement of more than 8,000 people during the past 2 weeks. The organization said that due to the escalation of hostilities in Ma'rib, Taiz and Hudaydah, 514 families were displaced at least once between 12th and 18th December. The largest numbers of displacement cases were recorded respectively in Hudaydah, Ma'rib, Taiz and Al-Dala, according to the organization. To that end, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees announced the displacement of 150,000 during 2021. Families continue to be displaced due to the fighting and the deteriorating economy, and partners continue to provide money, shelter and protection services for them. The German government announced a new financial grant of $15.6 million to the United Nations Children's Fund to support camps for displaced people in Yemen. According to the statement, at least 1 million people, including more than 300,000 children, will benefit from that grant. The children of Yemen need urgent help, said Philip Demel, UNICEF representative in Yemen, expressing his gratitude to Germany for this contribution, which, according to him, will help provide the basic support children need to survive. In Aden, the executive unit for overseeing displacement camps revealed that a number of children in displacement camps are without education. In its latest report, the unit indicated that the number of children of school age has reached 500,000 and that 18% of the displaced students in homes are not enrolled, while the number of children in the camps who haven't enrolled is 42%. The governmental unit recorded 103,966 children who need birth certificates to enable them to enroll in education. The Houthi military escalation has deepened the suffering of displaced Yemenis, whose numbers are in millions today. They are living under difficult conditions, seeking safety and stability, and despite efforts of aid agencies, their situation remains dire. The following report has more details.
The year 2021 brought many worries, suffering and tragedies that cast a shadow over all the people of Yemen. This suffering would be greater with the lives of Yemenis who were displaced by the war from their areas to live a harsh life whose suffering does not end, no matter how many days or years passed.
We fled from Hudaydah to Aden, and here we faced a lot of problems, including the high prices and the lack of food supplies. The products are very expensive in a way that can't imagine.
Displaced people have dreams and hopes with the approaching of a new year, but they remain trapped due to the absence of an effective humanitarian role towards them, which led the Executive Unit for the Management of IDPs camps in Aden to end its current year with a special event organized recently, in which the results of the multi-sectoral field survey for displaced people were reviewed.
Unfortunately, one of the most violations that Houthis are practicing on civilians during war is that of displaced people. We are talking today about at least 4 million displaced people in government-controlled areas in Yemen, where they suffer from difficult circumstances, face several challenges, and they are being used in this war. What the international organizations are offering now is very little to be mentioned. There is a lot of corruption practiced by international organizations.
A comprehensive report that cleared the picture of displaced civilians in the camps and their most prominent needs. Field results included shocking numbers and indicators as the field survey began its work on 13 governorates under the control of the government. And according to those results, the number of affected people reached 2,827,000 IDPs in displacement camps, while the total number of IDPs in homes reached 2,428,305.
حرصت الدراسة على نقل صورة واضحة The study was keen to convey a clear picture of the needs of the displaced, their situation and their locations, in order to work together with international organizations to find permanent solutions in partnership with the government. We need to move from this emergency phase to an early recovery one. That's what we are supposed to do in the coming days.
The suffering of the displaced is exacerbated and their numbers multiplied again and again. With the passing of a year, solutions are surrounded by papers. Perhaps the new year will carry their implementation and reflection on reality, so that the displaced people can live their lives in safety and stability.
World Food Programme said it will reduce food rations for 8 million people in Yemen from January due to lack of funding. This will push more people into starvation. More on this story is within the following report.
From January, affected families will get barely half the daily minimum ration from the UN agency. The 5 million Yemenis at immediate risk of slipping into famine conditions will remain on a full ration for now. The WFP warned that its food stocks were dangerously low and that more severe reductions would soon be unavoidable. Donors have pledged only $3.2 billion of the $5.64 billion requested by UN agencies for the humanitarian aid efforts in the war-torn country this year. The World Food Programme needs $1.19 billion to continue to assist the more vulnerable until May, and $2.89 billion to help those on the brink of famine throughout 2022. Every time we reduce the amount of food, we know that more people who are hungry and food insecure will join the ranks of the millions who are starving, said Corinne Fleischer, the WFP's regional director for the Middle East and North Africa. Without new funding, the WFP could be forced to cut people from food assistance programs completely. Malnutrition treatment and food supplies for children may also be reduced. According to the WFP, half of all families, about 16 million people, are now affected by inadequate food consumption, with the devaluation of the Yemeni rial and hyperinflation driving the economy to near collapse. Food prices have more than doubled across much of the country this year, while fighting across multiple front lines has displaced tens of thousands of people. Yemen has been devastated by conflict that escalated in 2015. The fighting has reportedly left more than 130,000 people dead, while tens of thousands more are estimated to have died from indirect causes such as lack of food, health services, and infrastructure.
For its part, the United Nations said that the World Food Programme's rations reduction comes at the worst time for Yemeni families. UN Deputy Spokesperson Farhan Haq indicated that the program needs extra funding to continue providing help.
Come at the worst possible time for families in Yemen who are dependent on WFP's food assistance to survive. In the last 3 months, inadequate food consumption, one measure of hunger tracked by WFP, has risen rapidly to affect half of all families, as currency devaluation and hyperinflation drives the economy to near collapse. Food prices have more than doubled across much of Yemen this year. With food assistance reductions from January, families will receive barely half of WFP's daily minimum ration. Without new funding, more severe reductions will soon be unavoidable. This could see people cut from food assistance programs completely. Malnutrition treatment and school feeding for children may also be reduced.
In Al-Mahra, the Yemeni Coast Guard received 5 Yemenis who were arrested by the U.S. Navy patrol ships while they were smuggling a shipment of weapons. The Coast Guard said in a statement that the ship was coming from Iran. Coast Guard in Al-Mahra said that the necessary legal procedures will be taken with the smugglers. Earlier, the U.S. Fifth Fleet ships seized approximately 1,400 AK-47 assault rifles and hundreds of thousands of rounds of ammunition from a stateless fishing vessel believed to be on its way to Houthis. U.S. Navy patrol coastal ships found the weapons during a search conducted by embarked U.S. Coast Guard personnel. The stateless vessel was assessed to have originated in Iran and transited international waters along a route historically used to traffic weapons unlawfully to the Houthis in Yemen. The vessel's 5 crew members identified themselves as Yemeni nationals. Turning to Ma'rib, government forces backed by national resistance thwarted Houthi attacks in the southern fronts. Field sources reported that government forces defeated Houthi attacks on Dana front south of Ma'rib. Sources added that the Houthi militia incurred heavy losses in equipment. Still in Ma'rib, government forces regained areas from Houthi rebels' control in the southern fronts. Field sources reported that Houthi militia moved reinforcements and launched attacks on Al-Arif and Al-Balak fronts. Sources added that the forces arrested a number of militants there. To the western coast, the military media of the joint forces reported that Houthi rebels moved fighters to infiltrate sites from which they had been defeated earlier in Maqbana and Al-Jarrahi. The military media confirmed that Houthi fighters were defeated, noting that military vehicles were destroyed and other militants were forced to flee. Further, joint forces shot down a Houthi drone north of Hais in Hodeidah. A military source stated that the joint forces spotted a drone launched by the Iranian militias, confirming that the drone was shot down. Coming next. Agriculture sector suffers due to the ongoing war in the country.
اضطرينا نحن نغادر من ذي وزحنا.
الله يستنقلكم يا محويتني لا الله يستنقلكم.
Welcome back. The Yemen Landmine Records called on the United Nations Development Programme to work closely with authorities and engineering teams to clear areas of mines, not the party involved in planting them, in reference to the Houthi coup militia. The organization said in a statement that many of the allocations for demining in Yemen provided by donor countries fall into unclear path through intermediary organizations, including the support of a party directly involved in planting mines. The statement added that most of engineering teams work in risky conditions and lack basic equipment. The ongoing military escalation in the Red Sea coast of Yemen threatens to destroy the Stockholm Agreement and have a devastating impact on thousands of innocent civilians. Almost 3 years since it has been signed, but the status reality remains as it is, due to the fighting, if not aggravated, due to recent change of front lines. The following report has more on that story.
Renewed hostilities in the Red Sea coast of Yemen threaten to destroy the Stockholm Agreement and have a devastating impact on thousands of vulnerable families. The agreement, signed 3 years ago, was designed to avert catastrophic military escalation on the Red Sea coast of Yemen. However, 3 years on, limited implementation of key components of the agreement, including a ceasefire and redeployment of troops in Hodeidah and a resolution to the situation in Taz, means that civilians continue to bear the brunt of brutal and ongoing conflict. In mid-November, renewed hostilities along the Red Sea coast forced over 25,000 people in the area to flee their homes, seeking safe and dignified shelter. Humanitarian needs in the area are extremely high, particularly in locations of previous front lines, which have not been accessible by humanitarian actors for more than 3 years. Vulnerable families are also facing critical protection concerns. Incidents of injuries and fatalities caused by Houthi mines and explosive ordnance are already widespread along the Red Sea coast. As shifting front lines force civilians into displacement, the risk of EOs and mines increases. To protect civilians in Yemen, aid agencies called on all parties to the conflict to reaffirm their obligations under international humanitarian law and international human rights law. As the conflict in Yemen heads towards its 8 years, It continues to cause widespread civilian loss of life, injury and displacement, while Houthi rebels expand their war nationwide and take for granted all international calls of peace.
In Aden, a wide public discontent emerged over the rise in domestic gas prices and transportation fees, despite gradual recovery in the value of the national currency. Local sources said that the price of a 20-liter domestic gas cylinder is still faltering at 15,000, with a decrease of only 200 riyals from the previous 2 days. To Taiz, a number of intellectuals and artists staged a protest in front of the Al Ta'awun public park, rejecting monopolizing it from a specific group. Locals said that groups aim to invest and profit from the park at the expense of others, a typical thing of Houthis' practices. They called on local authority to cancel the decision to rent the park, which is the only outlet for people of the city. Still in Taiz, the General Administration of Scientific Research at the University of Taiz held an event for Scientific Research and Innovation Support Day, under the slogan of strengthening the role of research serving development, society and contemporary issues. The event fits with the sole role of the universities, which is represented in building a solid partnership with the local society and catering for the basic needs of that particular society. The war has overshadowed all sectors of life in Yemen, and agriculture is no exception. Farmers are trying to cope on their own capacities to grow crops, but that seems really hard, especially when they lack basic equipment to do their work. The following report looks at some of the challenges farmers in Ma'rib encountered during the war.
Despite that Ma'rib Governorate is having the heaviest toll out of the conflict in Yemen, Orange presents a story of hope.
The buyer comes to the farm's owner. He says to him the cost on me is high, so it is difficult for the farmer. He bears the cost both when the price is high and when the prices are low. Look at the tree, they are full of oranges.
Ma'rib is the largest governorate in Yemen to grow orange among other areas. It counts for 70% of winter crops. This, however, decreased in the last years due to the consequences of war.
The war has cost us a lot. We call upon the government to provide us with gas and fertilizers, open roads and reactivate the orange sectors. All prices are high.
Ma'rib share in orange crops decreased by 30% this year as a result of the difficulty in transportation as the roads network in Yemen was cut off. Large losses and costly alternatives face farmers in Ma'rib Governorate. They have only two options: to cross through Al Gauf desert with the possibility that the farmer will lose his truck in the sand and spoil the fruit, or to try other routes that will cost him a lot of money and will make him buy his crop in the lowest prices. Hundreds of hectares of oranges are still bearing fruits on their branches, despite they bought their usual harvest season due to the war that closed all internal marketing and external export outlets to farmers.
Amid warnings from the outbreak of the fourth wave of COVID-19, the National Committee Against Coronavirus recorded 2 new cases of the pandemic. Committee officials said 1 case was recorded in Hadramaut and 1 in Aden. Also, no recovered cases were recorded, but 1 death. With the current updates, the total confirmed cases are 10,105, including 1,981 deaths and 7,002 cases of recovery. Here's a reminder of the main headlines. The military escalation deepens suffering of displaced people nationwide. The United Nations announces reduction of food assistance to Yemen amid funding crisis. The United States Navy seizes weapons heading from Iran to Houthi rebels. This is the end of the news. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.